Welcome to Storylab. In this episode, we will be starting the story of Javius Rath, as his journey at an age-old institution, thought lost to the weather of time, bears the unexpected fruit of bringing him face-to-face with his longtime crush, and a decision that will challenge the very virtues he worked so hard to forge. Javius Rath is your quintessential 20-something-year-old trying to figure life out. Love, career, family, the works. In the middle of all the uncertainty and white-knuckling it until things fall into place, he never expected to find the answers he needed most at an institution many were quite convinced no longer existed or believed should. So, Javius' story starts the night when he meets Travian. Javius and his friends went out to a local sports bar, a place that they frequent often. One of his friends brings a friend along, Travian. Now, we all know that this could go one of two ways. Either the friend group likes this new person and they hit it off, or it's awkward. No one really knows what to say, the conversation is very touch and go, and inevitably the night ends early for someone. We don't know who, but it ends early for someone. Fortunately, the boys love Travian. He immediately fits in, but there's something different about him. He's crazy polite. Like, no sir, yes ma'am, thank you, no thank you, the works. Even the way he dressed was polite. He had on a black, white, and tan polo tucked into his black slacks that had the crispiest traveler's crease and white leather tennis shoes. Picture the guy who attended a prestigious university and worked at some firm, either in wealth management, law, real estate, and you would have Travian. That or a Marine straight from base for a night out on the town in the 50s. That was Travian's whole vibe, just proper. When three women who sat at the next table over decided to join the crew after some banter with SJ and Marv, Travian literally stood up as the women approached and offered his seat to the woman closest to him and moved down to sit opposite Javius at the other end of the table. Like, he didn't need to do that. The women could have simply walked around him to the empty stools on his side of the table, but he decided to get up, offer his seat, and move down. At first, Javius thought Travian had made the move so that Marv, the friend who brought him out, and SJ could sit across from Melissa, Alina, and Myra. But as he spoke to Travian throughout the night, he got the distinct impression that that was only part of the equation. See, Javius had to ask Travian, what went wrong in his life to make him so proper? And why did he have on the Finance Bro starter pack? Travian laughed and nodded. It was clear it wasn't the first time that someone had brought this to his attention. So, Travian decided to tell him about how his life changed after attending the William Stead Martin Gentleman Academy. How before attending the school, he didn't really have any focus in his life, that while he was doing well, graduating from Emory as a poli-sci major with a minor in information systems, he fell into a relationship hamster wheel, most of his time being taken up between dating apps, working, and going on dates. So, after a year of nothing panning out, one of his friends told him about the Gentleman's Academy and how it was better than therapy. Gentleman's Academy? Javius asked just to make sure he heard him right and asked Travian to explain what that was. Travian told him, while the Academy's history could be traced back to finishing schools, places where men and women learned societal etiquettes, it was more of a place where men could learn what being a man looked like, articulate what their values are, and develop principles to help them live out those values. Now, Javius was baffled and thought the conversation was taking a deeper turn than what he was expecting for the first time hanging out with the guy. He thought about changing the topic, but as Travian spoke about the academy, you could see the admiration in his face, like this place really changed him, and he didn't mind anyone knowing about it. It only took a few minutes, but Travian had said enough things to get the whole table trying to hear what he was saying. There was no way you were going to mention defining masculinity at a table without every head turning. It wasn't just the talking point concepts, though. As he shared about his time there, his experience had become an extension of himself. It was like talking to someone through double vision, the true physical version of Travian, and then the off-centered, unfocused aberration. Everyone had questions. Even SJ, who hadn't stopped flirting with Alina since she came into the bar, paused to ask Travian about it. Myra said that she had heard about the academy, but that The practices and values were archaic or belonged to a form of society that no longer existed. Apparently, students at the academy learned how to ballroom dance, host formals, and perform several social graces and niceties endemic of Victorian England. "Oh, so you lived real-life Bridgerton," Melissa asked. Everyone laughed. Travian nodded and said, "Yeah, basically." His self-assured grin did something to Melissa, but the only sign of its effect was hidden behind her linger for a second longer than it should have eye contact before picking up her glass for a drink. Whether Travian picked up on it was hard to tell, as he went on to say that the English etiquette was just the surface. It was way deeper than that. But at the mention of the hit Netflix show and Travian's own admission, it was enough to have the entire table start talking in English accents, feigning propriety. Marv, who was mostly silent throughout the conversation, asked, "But isn't it weird being Black and learning all those rules and practices?" His tone suggested that this wasn't the first time he had brought this topic up with his friend. In front of new company of Black, South Asian, Sudanese, Filipino ethnicities, the question hung in the air for a second. But before Travian could answer, Alina jumped in. "Personally, I don't think being polite and having manners is limited to a specific race or ethnicity. Plus," now Alina fake-shaped her Afro-poof ponytail, "Travian, if you ever need a date to win a formal or something like that, just let me know. This girl would love to get into a ball gown." Myra and Melissa laughed, gesturing in agreement. SJ saw an opportunity and pivoted the conversation back onto Melissa and her friends, and having them come out to the lounge they wanted to head to next. What Travian didn't know was that Javius was going through that exact same hamster wheel he had mentioned, but with only one person, Aniyah. For Javius, it was less of a dating cycle, but more of an unrequited love roulette, and he just couldn't seem to win. And to be clear, Javius' story isn't about a girl. It wasn't just the unrequited part that got to him. It was the understanding that he simply wasn't who he needed to be to change the narrative, to defeat the incessant pessimism curled in the back of his mind, waking only to feast on the optimism of being whole. Call it timely pragmatism or whatever you'd like, but there was something about what Travian said that night that stayed with Javius. Even after the night ended and a few days followed, Javius found himself wanting to make those changes a person says they want to make when they want to become a better version of themselves. Waking up early, working out, eating better, building up their 401k, all that stuff. Changes that would somehow, but not entirely, lead Javius to finally approach Aniyah, who would somehow be waiting for him despite the passage of time and would unequivocally reciprocate the proclamation of his love for her, which then begins this blissful relationship they cherish forever. Unbeknownst to Javius, however, as those machinations grew in grandeur, pressing far past illusion, Aniyah had just signed a lease in another state, far enough to feed any hopefulness to the ravenous chasm of pessimism Javius had become so well acquainted with. And that's it for this episode. Feel free to follow the show, like, subscribe, enable notifications, all that stuff, so you can catch us next week for part 2 of Javius' story, The Graduation.